Good morning and welcome, and thanks for joining us. How are you? Hope you're well. It's the UK Israel Business breakfast event. If you've got questions for our panel today, please do use the chat. Please do use the Q&A. Feel free to network in the chat as well. We'll be in about an hour at 9:45. We'll be doing some networking, so stick around and you'll be able to see who's in the room, get to speak with each other and do some networking. But for now, we're going to go to Colin Glass, who is going to welcome everyone and tell us a bit more. Colin, go for it.
Right. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome to our third UK Israel Business Breakfast of 2021. In our last meeting, I spoke of seeing the light at the end of the tunnel in terms of lockdown restrictions due to the COVID crisis. This meeting starts with seeing a mere flicker of light following 2 weeks of darkness for all concerned in Israel and Gaza. However, I always mention that our organization is non-political and non-denominational, and therefore whatever one's views about the situation over the last 2 weeks or so, or even over the last few decades, or even over the last few centuries, we're not here really to discuss or debate these views, and that includes postings on social media relating to UK Israel business. Our mission, as we know, is to encourage and support bilateral trade between the UK and Israel, including tourism. Before the last couple of weeks put a temporary hold on tourism, Israel was tipped in the Times, in the Spectator, in the Daily Telegraph and other media publications as the next Mediterranean hotspot. Yeah, that's quite apt. That due to the country's impressive management of the COVID-19 situation and its strong vaccination rollout program. Israel's on the UK government's green list, so one of the safe countries with UK clearance. From a tourist and a business perspective, it'd be great if we could run a flight from Leeds Bradford to Israel, even a test flight. Sadly, that might be some way off, but we are working on trying to get Jet2 interested. On the business front, I attended an online conference recently called Grow MedTech, and I was delighted to meet Jennifer Robson, I don't think any relation to our panelists today, who is the sector manager, Health and Life Sciences, Trade and Investment for the West Yorkshire Combined Authority and for the LEP. And she told me that they are already forging relationships with Israeli companies, which I didn't know. And our city and region are trying to get more companies coming over here for inward investment purposes. So there's an inward delegation proposed, and that will prove very helpful to our proposed delegation, which we hope will take place next year to Israel itself. Now, as always, before I introduce our esteemed panel, I must sincerely thank our sponsors, our joint sponsors and partners. Their support is absolutely vital to enable us to continue the work in this region of UK Israel business. So firstly, our joint sponsors, and that is Town Centre Securities, and we welcome Edward Ziff today, and Big Change. Unfortunately, Martin Port's not with us today. For our partners, we've got the Department of International Trade. Mark Robson is here in the form of a panelist today, which I'll come on to later, and the business desk, and Lee J. Walker is a panelist as well. Other partners are Fleek Marketing, Jonny Ross, who is our facilitator, Mitchell Wealth Management, Stephen is here today, and we wish Charles Mazel Tov on the arrival of a new baby girl. The Sky Group with Mark Rothwell, Chef Works, Paul Gross, black solicitors, Nick Dyson, whose uncle has been in the news recently. Berries, Simon and Jeff Walton are here today. J-Life, Elliot Landy, the IOD, represented by Poonam Kaur, and Boost Drinks, Simon Gray. They're all, I hope, on board here. Unable to attend today, Manning Stainton, Russell Manning, and WA Healthcare, Jeff Baskin. But we thank them all for their support, and we're always interested in other partners who want to join us in our organisation. And last but not least, my own firm, Murray Harcourt, who are also partners. So now on to our esteemed panel, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce them. First of all, Mark Robson. Mark is, who I've known for many, many years, is head of Department for International Trade in this region, in the Yorkshire and Humber region. Mark, together with his team, provide international trade advice and support to small and large businesses. Mark's role is to lead a team of business advisors who help businesses in the region grow through international business, particularly exporting. He works with around 5,000 businesses a year, from SMEs to large businesses. And we're hoping that in next year, perhaps, the DIT will support us with a trade, if we run a trade mission to Israel. Lee J. Walker, who's Joint Managing Director of the Business Desk and a very good friend of mine. Lee J. is an experienced sales manager who's worked across the UK and the Middle East within the world of online advertising and recruitment. Prior to joining the Business Desk, I think it's some 11 years ago, Lee J. was working in Dubai, working for Manpower Incorporated as the regional group sales manager for the Gulf. He covered 6 countries and 9 offices and helped to launch 2 new business lines in the region. His experience before this was also working as a regional director in the Middle East. Returning back to the UK in early 2010, he headed up business development for the businessdesk.com, a company which I'm proud to say I was one of the founders. And in recent times, along with Alex Turner, who you may remember stood in at the last minute in a recent panel session, both he and Alex are now joint managing directors and have acquired the company through a management buyout. Last but not least is Paul Ulster. We're delighted that Paul is with us today from Zichron Yaakov in Israel. So Paul is an ex-Leeds Pat. He is Israel-based now, a broadcast journalist. He was or is a news and sports broadcast journalist, currently working as host and producer of Real Israel, a YouTube channel focusing on current affairs and major issues of the day. Paul is fortunate to have the opportunity to interview a wide range of political specialists and other journalists, and also business people in Israel. He has a special interest in the Israel-Palestinian conflict and in Middle East politics. He's a regular contributor to a variety of international news websites, including the Jerusalem Report, and was formerly Fox News's main Middle East correspondent. Paul, as regular attendees to our organization will know, kindly produces for us a letter from Israel, which makes superb reading. The latest edition, which inevitably covers the happenings of the last few weeks, will be sent out after this meeting. But last but not least, we've got our resident facilitator, Jonny Ross, whom always cheerful and superb presenter. So what would we do without him? Jonny, over to you.
Thanks, Colin. Very kind indeed. Yes, as I said, if you've got questions or if you have anything that you want to share with the panel, please do use the chat. Please do use the Q&A. Thanks for joining us today. It's great to have you here. So I wanted to start. I'm going to go to Lee J first, if that's all right, because I wanted to start with you. You're running a story, and I know we are all, I think, a bit sick of hearing about COVID and talking about COVID, but the reality is, we are living with COVID in terms of with business and personally. Your top story that you're running today, Stay Local, on the Business Desk website. West Yorkshire Mayor Tracy Brabin gives her opinion. Just tell us what's going on there, Lee J, and why it's making you a bit nervous.
Well, it's not making me personally nervous. I've had my single vaccine so far, and I'm awaiting for my second jab. I think it's a wise sort of advice still at the moment while we complete the current vaccination program. There's obviously still a threat out there. There's still understandably a desire to reduce those travel restrictions just while that's completed. But optimistically, us as a business, we are planning to host our first awards dinners in the Midlands in July, and we've got lots planned events wise from September. So I think it's just that PR advice coming out at the moment from government or local governments trying for people to be a little bit cautious. So,
yeah, this is for the affected areas of the Indian COVID variant, and it's sort of a piece of advice that's come onto the government website that they've not really told us much about, and conflicted with with us all starting to open up and hoping that June the 21st happens. Mark, I wanted to get a better understanding of your work. You've been at the DIT; it's changed its name over the years. You've been there a long time. I just wanted to get a better understanding of what you've seen over the many years, and where we're at, and I guess how COVID's impacted and what our current trade is like with internationally.
Yeah, okay, and hello everybody. I'm sorry I can't be there in person, as none of us can. Very enjoyed meeting probably many of you regularly in the past. Yeah, I've been in the organisation for 20 years. I was brought in from outside to try and shake it up and move it away from working with the very large global businesses to working with small and medium-sized enterprises, and that was our challenge. And the world has changed. Now there are many businesses of all sizes doing a lot more trade overseas. We set up various programs to provide training and development so that companies can build the skills to trade overseas. And outside work, but working with many partners, we've done other things, such as got very close to producing a GCSE in international trade and language. Sadly, that was knocked on the head about a few years ago, but it was starting out. There are lots of things from working with companies and working with partners that we've got to start develop, because as I see it, we need to create a world where international trade is just normal business. And to some extent, COVID has actually created that opportunity, as I'm sure Lee J and Paul and others will recognise, because nobody really knows. If Paul had said he's been sitting in Leeds, we wouldn't have been surprised. The fact he's sitting in Israel is, also not a surprise. And I could be sitting anywhere else in the world that had a good connection now. So it's created that opportunity for us to think more internationally. So I don't know if we're going to ask more about COVID and the impact of COVID for us, but I guess we were very much on the front line with COVID. I have a team of 30 odd advisors who work with companies face to face, or did in the past. And we were starting to work with companies at the point at which people were contacting us to find out, what the government was able to do at the moment to support them, but also to express their, highlight their problems. And so at the height of COVID, which is about a year or so ago particularly, we were providing daily reports by 3 o'clock that went to the Treasury about all the people we'd spoken to today, and what their issues were. And I have to say, it was an amazing time. It was horrible, but it was also amazing, because I've seen on a Friday afternoon, I was speaking to a large business that probably was going to have to close because of some of their liabilities coming up from a kind of basic delay in their supply chain. And by Monday afternoon, the Chancellor stood up in the House and made an announcement, basically saved them and presumably others in the same situation. So there were some brilliant reactions there. And our team in China, which one of them is now my deputy based in Leeds, we're involved in purchasing, both for the NHS, but also purchasing for companies that were starting to supply the PPE, which obviously everyone was planning it lasting a short period of time, but has obviously sadly lasted a lot longer. So it's had a big impact on us. But I think in some ways it's now become normal to have this kind of conversation virtually, and I think we shouldn't lose that opportunity. And can I just say as well, also, if you're ever doing it, don't lose the opportunity that Paul hasn't to advertise what you do and what your business does, because it's really lost opportunity.
Well, let's go to Paul. I mean, yeah, you launched a book last year on Amazon. I mean, I'm just going back a step here because you were Fox News's main Middle East correspondent. You must have, spoke. What are some of the highlights? Some of the highs? Who are some of the, who was the best interview? What was the moment that you thought, wow, this is, this is good?
Well, there have been a few different interviews across different spheres. I should point out that my work for Fox News was for their .com site, which is one of the world's most visited news sites. So I had a huge audience in the millions.
Bigger than the businessdesk.com?
Well, I wouldn't go that far. But so it was a great opportunity. And although I have to say, I wouldn't be a huge fan of the way Fox News in America is presented. The one reason why I agreed to work with them was because they give Israel a fair chance, which maybe isn't always the case with some other news organizations, but we won't go into that. So I had a really good opportunity to have the backing of a big organization that gave me free rein really to speak to people in the military, people in intelligence, people in business, people in politics, and also some fascinating people from the world of culture and sports, which was my original background, having been a racing broadcaster in Britain back in the day. So yeah, I met some fascinating people. I would say one of the most interesting interviews I did, I think probably wasn't for Fox, it was for the Jerusalem Report, but that would have been with Ron Prosor, who had been Israel's ambassador to the United Nations. And I sat down with him for lunch, and after I managed to drag him away from talking about Royal Ascot and how his wife enjoyed getting dressed up by going to the British races, we moved on to talk about how Israel is perceived at the United Nations. And it was a fascinating insight on the behind the scenes as opposed to what is broadcast about Israel. And it was an amazing insight and a very revealing conversation. I hope the interview reflected that.
Well, when did you're from Leeds originally. When did you move over to Israel?
I originally went to Israel in 1997 as a single guy. I decided to leave the British media, took a break. I got married here, came back when Israel was in a financial crisis at the end of the 1990s, and getting work was very challenging, even though I'd set up Israel's first all English language radio station in Jerusalem in the 90s. And then I came back here after a period living near Wetherby for 8 years, decided to take the family back, and we've been here since 2007, and my children are now grown up.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you. Lee J, I want to come to you. You must talk to businesses on a daily basis with the position that you're in. What I'm wanting to get from you is sort of what's going on in the business community. What are you hearing? What's the sort of the key issues? What are people saying? Is there a Can you see a big drive for growth currently, or is there lots of caution? Are the different sectors experiencing different things? What are the highlights that you're seeing at the moment?
I think an easy way to evidence that or show that is by the conversations that we have on a business level with our client database, our client audience, and who's planning to come to some of our events. So tomorrow we've got a virtual conference on for the Midlands called Invest Midlands, and we've got Kwasi Kwarteng speaking at it. Our plans are rolling out slowly to September. What we're seeing from a confidence point of view is certainly the larger corporates and larger professional services firms are erring more on the side of caution, not really wanting to rush back full teams in the office straight away, and certainly not be attending events immediately. So I think post-September is the sort of visibility timeline, what they're looking at, even some looking towards the end of the year. But I think if you look down the spectrum, where there's the SME business owners, directors, businesses out there, they obviously may not have the financial support structure in place to be, they're chomping at the bit and they're raring to go and want to get out there and do business. I see a boom coming in many respects. I think that, it's going to be a mixed bag, because obviously we're coming to the end of the furlough scheme as well. So, but I do think there is an appetite to get out there and do business. Many businesses haven't stopped. We haven't stopped throughout the entire pandemic. But yeah, there's definitely sentiment of people really wanting to get back and meeting people, whether or not it's in that new norm hybrid approach of doing a lot of meetings like this, not always having to travel and go meet people, etc. So yeah, very much mixed. But I would say it is very much mixed by the size of the market organisations.
I'm guessing there's been a growth in the demand of finding a good media partner and increasing coverage and brand awareness and getting to, I guess, your readers, because I'm certainly seeing confidence in with a lot of businesses. Is that what you're feeling as well?
I think, if you look back to the business desk in March last year, I just got back from skiing, and I literally cried into my glass of Malbec thinking, oh my God, we're going to have to cancel 170 events this year. We designed our business pretty much as an event-led revenue business. Overnight, quickly, we took some really good strategic decisions. We removed our registration wall, which has had an impact on our traffic. We've capitalized on the fact that people have been sat behind their computers. There was what I call on LinkedIn content crush, in the limited sources of credible information. So for us, it was a silver lining. We're a digital business. We benefited. I think that's really something key that's come through in this pandemic, that businesses who've adopted a really robust digital strategy, a tech strategy, have prevailed. And for us, we prevailed and expanded our business and developed our portfolio, in both virtual event conferencing, and we're moving into a rollout of in-person conferencing and events. So I think there's a lot of positivity around. I think a lot of businesses have gone through pain. There's been a lot of shake-up, but I think there's a lot of opportunities out there as well.
Paul, Colin was talking earlier around the sort of the commerce numbers of Israel, some impressive stats and figures. What do you see, living in Israel? What do you see different to the UK in terms of business? And my understanding is that you've moved ahead vastly with COVID, and is business all back to normal? And what's that big difference in drive that Israel has certainly in things like tech, in med, in healthcare, etc.?
It's a good question. I think as far as COVID is concerned, first of all, obviously Israel led the world on the vaccination front because of, I think in many ways, a kind of an Israeli mindset, which is they're not frightened to try new things. A lot of countries were very slow to be vaccinated because they weren't sure. Israel have always been at the forefront of new technologies and new opportunities. And I think Israel saw the vaccination program as an opportunity to get ahead, to get opened up before everybody else. Now, there's also the fact that Israel has a very highly developed system of medical information about all their patients, because everybody has identity cards, first of all, and everybody's medical information is computerized. And this was of a great deal of interest to Pfizer, as I'm sure people understand, because they were able to use Israel virtually as a testing laboratory for the rest of the world. And Israelis, unlike many other countries, people were rushing, almost fighting to get, fighting in the queues to get vaccinated. I had my second vaccination in January, I think it was. So, you know, most of the countries vaccinated were open for business. Of course, getting to places, of course, is difficult because so many countries are not in that position. But that's where, as Mark pointed out, situations such as this, and being able to talk with people virtually through Zoom and other facilities is very worthwhile. As far as the day-to-day, I'll give you just an example from the little small town where I live. 25,000 people live here. We're basically based around tourism. Beautiful little town on the Carmel Ridge, overlooking the Mediterranean Sea. Gorgeous little main street, which is famous for cafes and shops and art shops and things. Many closed down, many closed, because Israel did not get the support from the government for small businesses and individuals, self-employed people, as was available in Britain, for example. And I was very concerned that our beautiful little main street was going to end up as a desert, really, literally, as far as commercial was concerned. Already, from just walking around a couple of days ago, there's only one unit not let. I think this bounce back ability that Israelis have, we are used to adversity. Obviously, we go through a lot here, which people maybe in Europe and Britain don't have to deal with on such a regular basis. And I think that has seen Israel get back to normal far quicker than everybody else. And they're ready for business, and people are optimistic at that. Despite anything else that comes along, including the recent brief conflict, it's business as normal, and we just have to put our heads down and get on with it.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I find it really interesting how you described one of the reasons that you have stepped so far ahead is that you were already so digitalized. You were talking about the digital health records, and I guess, you know, Mark, I want to bring that to you, because in terms of pivoting businesses, which of the businesses have you focused? Has there been a set of businesses that have wanted to pivot internationally? Were there any correlations in the type of businesses, and how was there an increase in demand of wanting to pivot internationally, or am I far from it and that wasn't the case?
So I agree pretty much with what Lee J has said, in that there were some businesses. So I think he's divided into two periods. When in March, April last year, there was a kind of total lockdown. There were some people who were really struggling. Lots of businesses really struggling. But there were two approaches, and lots of the people that we were talking to, who were obviously those internationally minded anyway, took the opportunity after the initial shock to rethink their strategy. So we suddenly, after 2 or 3 weeks, got lots of people contacting us wanting to talk about the detail about countries they hadn't thought about. So there were people who took the opportunity to think strategically. But we also went out and offered people some support on building a better website, understanding how to sell better through a website. And we also moved all of our services digitally. So we run lots of events and programs, and we now run them very much like BJ and Co do, virtually. And I think, so there were a lot of people who took the opportunity after the first period to start thinking internationally. Some sectors really benefited, and some were looking for very specific opportunities, particularly the other things going on at the same time. So some life sciences and healthcare businesses, obviously thinking internationally, lots of digital businesses, financial and professional services, particularly those involved with the tech side, massively growing markets. So a lot of those starting to, but again, some manufacturing businesses looking to find new markets around the world. So it's quite strange. We've never had anyone that interested in Mexico particularly, but Mexico is one of those countries that some of the larger businesses are now thinking is a serious opportunity. There may be reasons for that. One is a free trade agreement, but also I think it's possibly a relationship with their largest neighbour and customer was not that great at the time. So I think that it's been an interesting time of change. But I think it's worth bearing in mind that we largely talk to companies that are growth oriented. They're thinking about how they're going to find new customers. They're already thinking about international business. So it's not fully representative of, I guess, the majority of businesses.
Well, I wanted to tap into that actually, because I can imagine that a lot of businesses have not even considered international at all. One of the things that you certainly do, I don't know if you're still running your grants. You mentioned websites just then. I know that there was grants. There may still be grants for businesses looking to internationalize. Is that the right word? What help businesses understand, maybe businesses that are watching right now, listening right now, help businesses understand how they could be opening the opportunity of even thinking about international. What are the typical traits in a business that you would question, or what would make you think you need to start thinking international?
Okay, so first thing is, do you want some more customers? I think is the starting point, because if you don't, and you haven't got capacity to deal with it, then it's a bit of a waste of their time and your time trying to find them. So I think that's the starting point. And I think it's best if you put together a plan, an approach, and part of your business strategy to grow your business, and part of that should be international. And I think everyone should question why they're not selling overseas on an annual basis. That's my personal feeling. And make a conscious decision, an unconscious decision. That said, the most businesses start trading overseas for the first time in response to an opportunity or an inquiry. And there are a lot of people who receive inquiries or opportunities from overseas and don't bother to take them seriously. And I think it's worth just thinking, well, actually, if I did want to take this seriously, what would I have to do in order to do this profitably? And I say profitably because there are some people who leap at it, sell something for the same price they sell it in the UK, and then realize there's a whole series of costs, not least of which is trying to get it to the country if it's a physical product, and also sort of check whether you need to complete any documentation, complete any get any approvals for things like food and drink and drugs, obviously kind of medical kit as well. So I think all of those things, it's worth just like thinking about it. And what we do is we provide training, we'll provide opportunities, we'll provide events, and we're moving towards providing a much more structured ladder of opportunity to go into a particular country. So we've just been doing something particularly with the fintech sector, which is really strong in Leeds and Manchester, and I covered the whole of the north into Canada. And because of this virtual world, we're starting in a couple of weeks a virtual trade mission whereby we'll be matching people with potential customers overseas. And the same will work with people coming in here. So there's a lot of opportunities there, and it's much easier and much lower risk in terms of finance and time than it used to be. So I think now is a very good time to think about it.
Because you don't have to jump on a plane to go and have a conversation. You can just jump on a Zoom call.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we can help set that up as well. But I think it's also worth bearing in mind that for many businesses as well, you do actually want to go and meet people to build a relationship. That's how business is done in lots of countries. So it is worth building that. But you can certainly find out whether it's worth the journey and worth the cost.
Are there many businesses that aren't right for internationalization? I mean, I can think of maybe some obvious ones, but are there, in the majority of cases, do you find yourself being able to turn around to a business and say, well, actually, you can, you know, or are there a number that really can't?
I'd say it's all about attitude. Every type of business sells overseas. I've even seen a window cleaning company, relatively local to where I live, do some work internationally. So,
Wow.
you know, people can do it. Very small consultancy businesses get a business overseas. And I think we shouldn't be distracted by size, because size, as I think Lee and Paul both said, it doesn't necessarily give you flexibility. And, you know, people who are pushing for opportunities will find them, and some of them will be international. And I think some larger businesses have to work through a real structured approach in order to be successful, perhaps. And certain types of businesses, it's a much harder to find, because you have to make significant investments. Say if you were selling, run a restaurant or a shop, you'd obviously have to have a facility in order to deliver the service. But for many businesses, it's about finding the right contact, making sure you do the due diligence, and then assessing the risk, and then deciding to go for it or not.
We've got a question from Stephen Mitchell. Thanks, Mark. So Paul talked about bounce back ability. Is moaning a British culture rather than getting on with things, or is the media a major player in doom and gloom? Is Britain too insular? Well, you're part of the media, Lee J. What's your take on that?
A Yorkshire thing isn't moaning, is it? I don't think. Sometimes I think that Yorkshire doesn't boast enough or talk enough about its emotions or how it feels. I wouldn't want to comment on national media, really. It's I'm constantly reading, reports that kind of contradict each other sometimes, and it's hard to find where we are sometimes in all of this with the pandemic. But I think there's certainly a lot to be optimistic about at the moment, if you read between the lines.
Paul, are we seen as moaners?
Well, not from over here. I mean, from here in Israel, the British scene, people look up to Britain as being a very, very sort of sophisticated society of gentlemen and ladies having, tea and cucumber sandwiches at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. There are certain images of the way Britain is. It's not something that is perceived that way. I do think, though, that I go back to the point I made before. And I think it's a very important point as far as Israel's let's get it done attitude is concerned. It doesn't always mean they do it right in Israel. Very often they say, yeah, we can do it. And then how do I do it? But they do have an attitude of grab the moment, because of the situation we find ourselves in sometimes. People do just go for it and are used to having to deal with situations that are alien to other societies. Now, what has happened over the last year and more with the pandemic has seen people's whole perceptions of life and what their capabilities are and what challenges they have to face completely change. And I think they've had a taste of the kind of thing people in Israel have had to deal with, the uncertainties. And maybe in the long run, it will prove a benefit to people in Britain and elsewhere, because they'll be more adaptable, thinking out of the box, more strategic, more prepared to move quickly and get on with things, rather than maybe sitting back and just doing things the way they've always been done.
Yeah. Mark, you obviously speak to many different countries, or you certainly have an understanding of us internationally. Martin Simmons has pinched my question. I was going to ask you, Mark, how we're perceived, and should we be looking at what's just happened in the Eurovision Song Contest to sort of, is that the perception? Martin said, what do you all think to Eurovision? Serious question. What's your top tip for business supporting each other overseas? Mark, I am curious, whether we answer the Eurovision question straight away. How is Britain perceived?
I think generally Britain is perceived as being pretty straightforward. We'll see what we say we're going to do. We'll probably do it, and our products and services seen as very high quality. And that's not just me saying what is, the government would like me to say as a Conservative. I think it's genuinely how we are seen. We're seen as pretty straight. If we agree to do something, we'll do it. And what we do, we have pretty good standards. And I wonder whether, Paul, part of the stuff about us moving slightly slower perhaps than Israel is also because we're a very old society. We've been trading globally, and we've been around for thousands of years doing things, and I think that just builds in this sort of degree of tradition and how things are done as well. So I think that genuinely how we're seen around the world. As in Eurovision, I haven't seen it. I know my children watched it, and I think there are two things relating to it. Firstly, according to my children, our song wasn't performed as well as it could have been. So I don't know. I didn't see it. So it doesn't mean that people are against us. I think truth is an absolute defence against paranoia, as is someone shooting at you or something, I guess. So I don't know whether necessarily it was just that the song wasn't as great as it could have been. But I think also it's quite clear that there's been particular blocks that vote for each other anyway in the past. But I think I just sit there and think, well, which of the countries that took part generates billions of pounds from selling pop music? And I think it's ironic that at the same time, a major festival was airing itself on Sunday where there was, a couple of bands playing that were kind of global bands that their last album produced something like that was £1 billion worth in sales. I think maybe we should start with loads of points for the give points related to the value of this music to our economy, and then we'd always win, wouldn't we?
So we're just being kind, are we? Lee J, any thoughts on a serious point of the Eurovision Song Contest? Why it was so bad this year?
My personal opinion is I never watch it because I always think it's bad. So it's nil point from me.
And Paul, any take from bearing in mind the current political state, you didn't do too badly, but any thoughts on why Britain was so bad?
Well, I didn't watch the show. I do my best to avoid it these days, but I suspect they just weren't very good. It was one of the things. As far as Israel goes, one thing I noticed about Eurovision is that I grew up listening to Terry Wogan doing the Eurovision Song Contest. He was absolutely brilliant. And it's very tongue-in-cheek in Britain. We don't take it too seriously. I think that's one of the things the Europeans don't like about Britain as far as the Eurovision Song Contest is concerned. Here in Israel, they take it very seriously. I mean, it really is. They think it's I remember interviewing Dana International after she came home after winning in about, was it 99? Something like that. And of course, that was such a showcase for Israel, not only for winning the song contest again, but also that because of the gender of the singer and all the issues around it, it highlighted the freedoms that are available here in Israel that aren't in so many other places. So that was quite an experience, but that apart, again, here in Israel, our representative was an Ethiopian Israeli, and that also showed our diversity, which I think would have been an eye-opener for a number of countries and viewers watching on throughout Eurovision and beyond, to Australia in particular, where they're crazy about it.
I think you're right. I don't think we do take it seriously at all. Lee J, I've got some questions, but if any of you do have any more questions, please do add them in the chat or the Q&A. I will come back to them. But just before I do that, Lee J, I just wanted to ask, you mentioned that one of the things that the business desk does is you have this focus on events as your business model. What's the benefit there for the business? Why have you gone in that direction, and what's the value that can bring to a business in terms of whether that be branding or whether that be engagement with the business?
Yeah, I think historically our business was set up very much as an advertising-led revenue business model. But digital marketing has really gone through an evolution with the rise of pay-per-click or programmatic advertising. And because of that, and because we're more of a quality than quantity audience, even though we see up to 400,000 unique visitors across the North and Midlands visit our pages each month. We'd moved to an event-led revenue model because it seemed to be a more secure way of having revenue until March last year. What we're seeing now is a complete different change of we do advertising, content and events, whether it's virtual or in-person events, and we've got 2 leadership awards in the Midlands in July. We've got a corporate finance dinner in Manchester in September. We've got the Northern Leadership Awards at the end of September, and then our Business Masters Awards across all regions in October. But we're actually putting together at the moment a big tech conference called Disruptors, which will be a virtual conference, but hopefully we'll be doing some of the sort of question time seminars in person at locations, we hope, like Nexus in Leeds. So our business is, very much adopting and being agile and able to present and help businesses with either branding, thought leadership, or just straightforward business development from all the different services that we offer.
But I guess the ethos behind it is get people in a room or get people together. There's more chance of them building a relationship and more chance of business occurring.
Absolutely. I think there'll always be that space. There's always that personal touch. As much as we love the virtual world and doing virtual conferencing, and we've got a very big one on tomorrow with 70 speakers. I do talk to a lot of people, and there is a little bit of Zoom fatigue sometimes. Where it's nice to go into Leeds now. I did last week with had lunch outside Restaurant Bar and Grill with Tim Parr from RSM, and it was buzzing. It was alive. I think people are wanting to get out there and have that human interaction. So I'm looking forward to the next 6 months. I think there's going to be a lot going on and a lot of positivity, and hopefully a lot of people have been sitting on some bank balances and they want to get out there and do business.
And you're getting married in the next 6 months as well.
I certainly am. Yes,
that's a highlight.
I'm getting married in September. Fingers crossed. Hopefully that it can all go ahead. Yeah, it's going to be an enjoyable do in North Yorkshire.
Congratulations to you.
Thank you.
Ivan Green's asked a question, so I'm going to put this to Mark. And the reason I was asking Lee J around the events and getting people together is what I'm hearing from you, Mark, is that people as businesses just need to start speaking outside of the UK. Ivan Green says, though, my experience is that you have to set up a dedicated international group to prepare to approach the export market, and any orders received must be given priority and not allow an increase in UK demand to push the export orders back. Is that something that you see, Mark, or you agree with or disagree with?
Well, I think people do. Maybe it's worth a separate conversation, but I think if you're going to put a lot of effort into winning business overseas, once you've won it, obviously you want to make sure that you can service it. Otherwise, it's a disappointment to your client, and it's also a bit of waste of time and money. But I mean, there are many businesses with many hundreds of clients, and I always thought before I joined DIT and when I first joined, the thing that told you whether a company was or a business was really international or not was whether they talked about countries or markets, or whether they just talked about people. And people are different, and they're as different across a range in this country as they are overseas, and the different cultures overseas. So I think people just talk about and understand the people, and what country they're in is just one facet of how you do business with them. And I think also many businesses operate in different, what I would call markets. So some might be partly in healthcare, but also in education maybe. And each of those markets will be different. So I think the trick is to see it like that. So and some people trade overseas just by just existing clients, to broadly in the same way, bearing in mind the different things that you do need to do in order to sell overseas, just to get the documentation right. Make sure you handle things like payment, etc. But people do it all the time, and so you don't necessarily have to have a different structure at all. It could be just this order's coming from, I don't know, London, this one's from Essex, and this one's from, I don't know, Tel Aviv.
Are there examples of good collaboration where there's not just selling going on? Because obviously, most businesses want to just sell more. But I'm curious as to whether there's a collaboration piece that actually grows the business. That's the route to market to grow the business.
Oh, whole loads of them. So in two areas, particularly professional services, an awful lot of professional services cover international trade by starting out, at least, by a reciprocal arrangement with a partner overseas that's fairly similar. So you look around lots of law firms, unless they get to be very large, they have international collaborations with people and they give reciprocal referrals. And that can work very well. And of course, in things like also in academic type businesses and academia, it's quite normal for people to have joint projects, develop products effectively. And then I suppose the third is that lots of businesses use skills around the world to develop products. So there are whole loads of even larger businesses with global supply chains, and many of those are innovative partnerships. They're sharing IP, they're sharing, someone who's got a particular skill will develop things. And I'm absolutely certain that we'd be able to highlight some between medical tech businesses in Israel, med tech businesses in the UK, because those kind of things will work all the time. And then of course you've got formal relationships as well, where you have, joint ventures and franchising and all that sort of stuff. So absolutely, all the time.
Paul, your book, many international sales?
I think yes, because it's in English at the moment. So yes, I think the vast majority of my sales are very much overseas. Yeah, particularly the US and UK. Yeah.
Wow, the US.
Yes.
And are you on? So what Amazon? Because all the Amazon platforms are different, aren't they? Does that mean that you have to be on a number of different Amazon platforms, or am I talking nonsense?
Well, I think the way it was set up is that basically the book is available wherever you are in the world. The book is available through the nearest main portal, whether it's Amazon UK or Amazon.com or AU. Or
because I'm aware that for some products you've got to go onto the individual, but I guess with books it's different. Fair enough. What do you see, Paul? From an Israeli business point of view, the desire to collaborate, not just to sell internationally, but to collaborate internationally?
Absolutely. I think that Israelis have realized that from very early stage that in order to go forward, they had to develop partnerships with people outside of this very tiny place. Israel, for people that aren't aware of it, is that the habitable area of Israel, half of it is desert, the Negev desert, and is very sparsely populated. But the populated area of Israel, and one of the reasons that it causes such issues, is really no bigger than Yorkshire, and probably slightly less. And so this is a small country that has to do business with partners elsewhere, and they're very adaptable. One thing that I would say to people considering doing business with Israelis and Israeli businesses is that one good thing is that most Israelis speak pretty good English, which I think is very useful. However, I think my advice would always be to have somebody that is able to sit in and translate, because there's a lot of things fall between the chairs, really, as far as nuance goes on and misunderstandings. And I've seen that from when I've been in meetings with my businesses that I've been involved with here. I remember coming out of one meeting in London with my Israeli CEO, and he turned to me and said, "Oh God, that was a disaster." I said, "What do you mean? He wants to sign?" It completely missed somebody that speaks very good English but have missed the nuance. And I think it is very important, because Israelis have a very different culture to that in Britain. And while they may be able to speak very decent conversational English, when it comes to business, and maybe Mark and Lee can comment on this with Israelis and probably other countries as well, if you don't have somebody that understands the culture and language in those meetings, it can halt or slow down the progress of business being done.
Lee, are you involved internationally with any of your clients at all? Do you have many international conversations?
Well, the Business Desk is very much a regional business news publication, but what we've seen recently, even from a lot of the businesses that we mention and talk about are trading nationally and internationally, but we're also seeing a lot of the higher end sort of professional services firms that we work with are representing global organisations and very outward facing, and we've changed how we operate in certain respects. We're working across multiple regions, sometimes with our own marketing. We're putting on, we had a very successful event all about investing for the north of the UK called Invest North on March 23rd, which both UK Israel business was a part of, and DIT. And we did that very much to go outside the Business Desk walls to drive interest to a national and international market, because very much this, what, as said before, this pandemic has accelerated that opportunity for international and national business opportunities. It's not just about your local network anymore, although that's really important as well. I believe the opportunities are far greater out there.
I have to say, from my own experience, I've never spoken at so many international conferences that I have done in the last 12 months. I spoke at international conferences prior to COVID, but just the volume that I've spoken at in the last 12 months, it's just removed the barrier, and it's given the ability of conference organizers to get speakers very easily, so it is fascinating how things have changed. Mark, how important, it sounds like a flippant question, to be perfectly honest, but how important is language? Can we just think that English is fine?
I think that English is finer than, if you're a language purist, you'd like to think it is, but languages are really important. And I think in two respects. Firstly, I absolutely agree with what Paul has said. You actually need to understand how business has done what people mean. So it's always best to have somebody at a critical meeting who understands what's going on. The converse of the conversation that you were talking about, Paul, with someone who thought it went very badly. I also know of a very large company that had spent a lot of time building up a massive opportunity in China, and the chief executive flew over from the US in order to seal the deal, and that's not what he did at all, because at the last minute, a very old person sitting at the back of the room said, well, maybe we go and enjoy some Chinese dancing. At which point he said, no, bud, I'm afraid I'm really tired after the flight, I won't bother. And it wasn't until he got in the lift leaving the meeting where he realized from the crestfallen face of his person in market that he basically just lost the deal, because that was an important part of the relationship, was actually getting to know the business you're doing business with. So I think language can be really important. And the second area is the person you're talking to may speak perfect English, but in many countries, you've got to get to the place and get past the receptionist, and they may not. And so I've even been in Denmark, somewhere where no one spoke English. And so my very limited amount of Danish and German allowed me to get to the right place. And particularly if you have taxi drivers, most taxi drivers in a lot of these countries, and like even Germany, they're largely not, their second language is German. And their first language is, I don't know, could have been Polish or Turkish or something. So, they don't speak English at all. So I think it's really important to get to the door that you learn some of the basic languages. And can I just also add, talked a little about Amazon earlier on. Of course, there are many, many online platforms around the world, and those that are the main ones in lots of countries are not the likes of Amazon. So it's worth looking at who you want to be registered with. So Latin America, it's one different. China, there are 2 or 3 very large ones. And yeah, and depends what you're selling. Some of them are very sector specific, like, food or, other high quality goods. So.
Yeah, you've made a very, very good point there, because we are so sometimes narrow-minded, myself included. Mark, you mentioned how language can be good. So does that become a barrier then, or are the likes of DIT able to facilitate with things like that?
So I think it's the culture side that is often more a barrier than the language. But there are many businesses now. So when I started out, and presumably when Lee J was out in the Gulf as well, you actually getting someone to do translation for you is really quite hard work and expensive. Now there are so many businesses, and one of the biggest is based in Leeds. It's very easy to get various forms of translation, and so I think it's much easier now, and so there's no real excuse. And I think that translating a letter, people would think, do I want to spend the time and the money getting this translated, or will it work in English? Now it would just be seen as extremely rude not to have sent something back in the language. So I think the availability of services and the cheapness of services makes it pretty important that you do.
I don't know your exact involvement with Northern Powerhouse. I must be honest. What's the relationship with the Northern Powerhouse? Are you just in the DTI?
The Northern Powerhouse is a government area covering the north, and I'm part of a team that covers the north of the Northern Powerhouse. I'm part of a Northern Powerhouse team, but there are other Northern Powerhouse organisations. So there is an organisation called the Northern Powerhouse,
which is my confusion. Yeah.
Yes, and there are also the local enterprise partnerships who come together under the Northern Powerhouse as well.
Right.
We work alongside all of it, fundamentally, there are various elements to it. It's about business growth across but also transport infrastructure and basically growing the northern economy. So we're part of the government's support in that area, and we do the international trade and investment side.
Lee, obviously, huge presence in Yorkshire. How are we doing regionally in terms of inside the UK from other things that you see? I know you've got presence in other areas, have you not, as well?
Yeah, I think there's the regions are in the best position that they've ever been in. We cover the Midlands and the North, so obviously with the efforts of rebalancing the UK economy, devolution. It's nice now that we've got a metro mayor for West Yorkshire. There's huge opportunities. We're seeing, lots of investment from government, lots of government departments being presented to the regions. And as well, you combine that with everything that we mentioned before around the tech, the digitization, the looking, businesses looking nationally and internationally. I think the regions are in an amazing position now, better than they've ever been. It's good times ahead, hopefully.
Well, we have come to the end of our time, I'm afraid. It's been a fantastic conversation. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you so much. Thanks for being with us. I'm going to bring Colin back to speak to us, and then there will be a touch of networking towards the end. But what a fascinating panel. Thank you so much. Colin, go for it.
Thanks very much, Jonny, and thanks to Mark, Lee J, and Paul. As you say, it was a great conversation. Just a couple of things that cropped up. I think Paul mentioned Ron Prosser, the former ambassador to the UK, who's now or became ambassador to the UN. We were privileged to have him some years ago now as a visitor to UK Israel Business and a speaker. I remember it well. So that he's a very powerful politician. And also in the business desk, one of the main stories this morning is about a former panelist company, Astonish, who have just done a £20 million investment on new premises in Bradford. And Astonish, as many of you know, do export all over the place, but they do export to Israel as well. So that's topical. And thirdly, last meeting we mentioned the pill cam, the little pill camera that you swallow, and it helps to see whether you've got bowel cancer or not. The NHS are partnering, and just very quickly, says that Sir Simon Stevens, who is the chief exec of the NHS, says it's now pushing ahead with genuine innovation to expand services for many other conditions. This is with Israeli companies. And that's why we're now trialing these ingenious capsule cameras to allow more people to undergo cancer investigations quickly and safely. So there's a lot happening with Israel, even in our own little way here, and hopefully that will continue. So thank you very much to the panelists again, and thanks for everybody else coming on board. And over back to Jonny to arrange the networking.